Who are the most likely candidates from the Baltimore Ravens roster to make their first Pro Bowl in 2022? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And we're back, a Tuesday edition episode. We're going to be diving into Ravens content all throughout the show, as is per usual for this show here on Locked On Ravens. And there was an article that was put out by Bleacher Report, Ian Wharton of Bleacher Report, a couple days ago that talked about Pro Bowls. And instead of actually talking about, who's the most likely to make the Pro Bowl, this, that, and the other, it was who are the most likely players to make their first Pro Bowl in 2022. And on that list was Odafe Oweh, which I think is a player that could definitely make his first Pro Bowl. So I'm going to take that concept and I'm going to expand on it a little bit and talk about pure Ravens throughout the entire roster. So offense, defense, and special teams that could make their first Pro Bowl in 2022. We'll do it in the second and third segment. So in the second segment, we'll talk about offensive players. In the third and final segment, we'll talk about defensive players as well as specialists. But in the first segment, I do want to kind of go back to the 2021 season. And I know it's a season that a lot of people want to forget. I get it, 8-9. They missed the playoffs for the first time since 2017. A lot of bad happened in 2021, but there were some glimpses that I think we saw there, and especially in the beginning part of that season, that we can take into next year and say, hey, look, this team figured stuff out. It was just injuries and this and that and the other. So I want to talk about their start. Their 8-3 start, where they somehow through 12 weeks, despite the injuries, were the number one seed in the AFC. So we'll talk about that a little bit in the first segment. So we're going to dive into that all in a second. Before we do that, though, if you're here with us on YouTube, thank you so much for watching and subscribing. If you have done that, I appreciate you. If you have, where you hit 2,000 subscribers about a week ago, it was super exciting. I had that goal for a while. The next goal here for Locked On Ravens, 3,000, going up in 1,000 subscriber increments. So if this is your first time on this channel or you're a returning person who hasn't subscribed, why you should subscribe is because we put out daily Ravens content 5 days per week. So Monday through Friday, we do Ravens news, analysis, opinions, anything you need to know about for this team. We have it up to the day news every single weekday. So it's a way to subscribe to this channel and, of course, get that news. And it's free also. No money involved there. So if you have subscribed, again, thank you. If you haven't, you still have time. I promise you still have time to do so. If you heard us in audio form, thank you as well, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you're listening, wherever you're listening, however you're listening, thank you for listening in audio form. Be sure to turn notifications on for our content and be sure to follow us. It's the same show, both in audio and video form. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at KaosStracker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's talk about the Ravens 2021 season. We'll focus on the stretch before the 6-game losing streak. So that 8-3 stretch, I think a lot of people just forget. I think they forget how, I don't want to say dominant because there were a lot of close wins, but the Ravens pulled out wins and were an 8-3 football team through 12 weeks, which was good for the number one seed in the AFC. And I remember back before the preseason that year, right last offseason after free agency, after the draft, we were talking about this team, and I said it's the same type of ceiling that I had when we talked with Kaji Ismail on Friday. I said, look, this is an AFC championship team, 100%, this, that, and the other. And then the injuries happen. You start to see guys go down. Derek Wolfe goes down during the joint practice. You have LJ Fort go down the torn ACL in the preseason game against Carolina. Obviously, J.K. Dobbins, huge. You had guys missing training camp, right? Rashad Bateman goes down. Jimmy Smith missed some time. Bradley Bozeman, Kevin Zeitler. They had a bunch of guys miss time during training camp, and what that did was it messed up timing a little bit, I feel like. Now, it's not the be-all, end-all. There's still players that have to go in there. They get the snaps, they get the reps, but the Ravens really didn't have their full offensive line on the field for a decent amount of training camp because Ronnie Stanley obviously was still recovering. He came back for the later part of it. But despite all of that, and despite losing Dobbins, Edwards, Peters, and losing in week one, the Ravens lost to the Raiders in week one. It was obviously that overtime game, 33-27. And I think a lot of people remember That overtime is one where Don Martindale refused to not blitz. And I think that that cost them in the end, I feel like. But regardless, the Ravens, they lost that game. And then who are they staring in the face in week 2? It's the Kansas City Chiefs, a team they have not beaten in 3 years. They're 0-3 against them in the past 3 seasons at this point. They pull out the gutsiest win that they pulled out, I think, all season. There were a couple other games you could talk about. Obviously, the Colts game, that was a game that huge win. But in terms of gutsiness, I think the Kansas City Chiefs one barely tops the Colts. I think the Colts one was the most impressive one, but the Chiefs one, I think, was the gutsy. 36-35. Odafe Owe, who we'll talk about in the final segment, forced that fumble on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And yeah, they beat the kryptonite, Lamar Jackson's kryptonite, as I know a lot of people said. So that was a big win for them. A team that could have easily been 0-2. They end up being 1-1. They go on a stretch where they win a couple more games. In fact, they win 4 more games on a 5-game winning streak. They admittedly get beaten very badly by Cincinnati, 41-17. They have the bye week, and then the games start to get a little bit closer-ish. You have that 34-31 overtime win against Minnesota. The Miami game, though, was when I think stuff turned for them. The 22-10 loss there. A team in Miami that was not performing well. They had talent, but they just weren't performing. And so Baltimore ends up, laying an egg there and just didn't have any answer for the cover 0. And then we saw 2 close wins against Chicago and against Cleveland. But by that point, the offense was already starting to struggle a little bit. 16 points against Chicago, 16 points against Cleveland. Now, admittedly, Lamar Jackson was not there for the Chicago game. He missed that with an illness. So Tyler Huntley filled in and won that game. A very spot start for him. So impressive, all things considered, for him. But then obviously the 6-game losing streak. But let's stop. Let's stop right before the 6-game losing streak. For a team to go 8-3 with the amount of injuries they had, that didn't just stop. And I know I've said this before, but it's not like the injuries all of a sudden week 3 happen and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, we haven't had an injury in a couple weeks now. It was consistent every week. And it wasn't just the season enders. It was guys going on IR for 4-week stretches, 6-week stretches. It was guys being day-to-day, week-to-week, missing practices, being questionable. A lot of the stuff that the Ravens were dealing with injury-wise was pretty brutal. And the fact that they were able to pull out that 8-3 record, position themselves, and I talked about this because their back half of the schedule, and we all knew this, their back half of the schedule was so much harder than their first part of the schedule, where you had obviously the end of season stretch where you had from week 13 on, well, actually, we can go week 12. You had Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Green Bay, Cincinnati, the Rams, and then Pittsburgh again. That's a brutal stretch of games. And I know the Ravens didn't end up losing those final 6, but they position themselves. I did say if they want a chance to make the playoffs, they have to position themselves early so that they can afford to lose a game against the Packers or a game against the Rams. And they did that. There were a couple losses where you would obviously like to see wins. You'd like to see them go. I mean, in a perfect world, they go 11-0 there instead of 8-3, right? But obviously, it's very hard to go 17-0 at this level. And so Baltimore, the couple of losses in there, but they pulled out again the win against the Chiefs. They looked like they were going to lose that game against Detroit, and then Justin Tucker saves them. They beat Denver, who was undefeated at the time. The Indianapolis win, very impressive. The Chargers, Justin Herbert coming in as MVP candidate. After that game, we never really heard about Justin Herbert in the MVP conversation. After that game, Baltimore won 34-6. The Cincinnati game, obviously, we're putting that one away. But then you have Minnesota, where again, it just felt like the Ravens were going to lose that game. There were just a couple things going wrong, and then Baltimore still pulls out the gutsy win. Miami, again, we're putting that one away. Chicago, with that late touchdown on that 4th down cover 0 play where Chris Westry gets beat on that double move. Then Devonta Freeman saves the day with his touchdown. The Cleveland game where Lamar Jackson throws 4 interceptions and the Ravens still win the game. It was a game of, you get the ball. No, you can have it. No, you have it back. No, you. So it was like all these turnovers in that game. The Ravens pull it out. So the fact that they were there with the injuries, right? This is a team that had no Gus Edwards, no Marcus Peters, no J.K. Dobbins for the entire season. Obviously, a couple others there as well. Ronnie Stanley played in just 1 game. He missed the rest of that season. And then I talked about it, right? Other guys who missed significant time who were key players. I mean, you talk about the guys who missed the end of the season. Deshaun Elliott goes out. He has that arm injury. Marlon Humphrey tears his pec. Lamar Jackson, a huge one. You have that as well. And then it was weird because you had guys on the COVID list, like in that Detroit game that they had to have a lot of their like front seven out. I know Justin Madubuike missed that game. Justin Houston missed that game. They had a couple defensive linemen out, so they had to, again, call guys up from the practice squad. It just felt like the whole year it was guys getting called up from the practice squad, new signings of the practice squad, new signings of the 53-man. It was a constant roster shuffle. And the fact that John Harbaugh had that team at 8-3, the fact that the Ravens players were able to perform to that level to get them to 8-3. Was it perfect? Were they always blowout wins? No, they weren't. But you still had a team that was fighting despite knowing that they had a lot of key pieces out. Those guys believed in each other. And then to briefly talk about the 6-game losing streak, this wasn't a team that lost all these games by 50 points. The only real game they lost by a huge amount was the Cincinnati game, and that was a game where obviously Lamar Jackson's already out with his injury. Tyler Huntley goes on the COVID list. They have to start Josh Johnson in the spot start, who's been there for, what was it, like 10 days at the time? And admittedly, early on, it looked like, oh, okay, maybe the Ravens have a chance. And spoiler alert, they did not. They did not have a chance at the end, unfortunately. But the Ravens, they lose in week 13, 20-19 to Pittsburgh, 24-22 to Cleveland in week 14. And 15, it was 31-30 against the Packers. Week 17, we're skipping Cincinnati. Week 17, it was 20-19 against Los Angeles. And week 18, 16-13 in overtime against the Steelers. These were 1.2, 0.3 point losses. And ultimately, it did decide their fate that they did not make the playoffs for the first time since 2017. But the fact that they were at 8-3, they were the number one seed in the AFC through 12 weeks, despite all that they went through injury-wise up to that point. I don't know. I just wanted to talk about it a bit because I found it so impressive, honestly. But we still have a ton to talk about here on the show. When we get back, we're going to be diving in to some players on the Ravens offense who could be making their first Pro Bowl appearance, potentially guys who could earn that. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on the show, but first I do want to tell you a bit about BetOnline. And BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your sports betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's Major League Baseball scores. And BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. That's the website that allows you more device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And again, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. I really do appreciate that. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, like this video, and also be sure to follow us in audio form and turn notifications on. Let's now talk about some Pro Bowl potential players who could make their first Pro Bowl in 2022. You look at the Ravens roster, so talented up and down, and we're focusing on offense here. So obviously the quarterback position, Lamar Jackson's made some Pro Bowls. That's a player we're not going to talk about. But running back, there are some guys. I think J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards certainly could make their first Pro Bowls. I know, look, I thought J.K. Dobbins was going to have this massive breakout year last year. And I think his talk proved that, what he was showing proved that, and what he showed during his rookie season proved that also. But unfortunately, as we know, the injury took his season away. And so we're talking about J.K. Dobbins now as a player that's going to be motivated, going to be hungry. Maybe he's ready for week one. Maybe he's not. We don't know at this point, but he's a player that has such talent. He's a player that he bounces off of guys, has amazing, he moves side to side very well. Like he's able to take those jet sweeps. We saw a bunch of those. I know one against Houston. He had another against Cincinnati where he takes those things. He bullies guys at the line. I mean, he is a powerful runner that also has, he's not a speedster, but he has deceptive speed, I'd say. He's not like a 4.2 guy, but he can run away from guys. I think I'm also excited to see what he does as a pass catcher out of the backfield. I'm excited for all the running backs also to do that. Gus Edwards, Tyler Beatty, Mike Davis, whoever it is on that Ravens roster. I think Dobbins has that ability. He was talking it up. The Ravens were talking it up last year. So I'm excited to see that for them. And then, I mean, Gus Edwards, a guy who has improved his game every single season, has been so trustworthy in terms of averaging over 5 yards per carry in each of the 3 seasons he's played in. So I think for the Ravens, what he's able to do, he has so much left in him, but I think he's on that like underrated aspect. And I think J.K. Dobbins is too, but he's the second round pick. To less of an extent, he's in the, he's going to be a player that ends up, I don't know. second round picks ended up getting more hype than undrafted guys, but Gus Edwards has the more proven track record just based off of experience. But both of these guys are so young. They're able to be together as a tandem for a couple more seasons. They're even signing Edwards to that extension. J.K. Dobbins having a couple more years. So I think that, yeah, we could certainly see Dobbins or Edwards, or who knows, maybe both, make the Pro Bowl, depending. Now, there are going to be competition for touches, and there are plenty of talented running backs in the AFC that, earn those Pro Bowl nods. Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, so many others as well that earn consideration there. There are a bunch of talented running backs in the AFC North: Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, and obviously there are a bunch of others throughout the AFC. I don't want to leave anybody out purposely. There's a couple guys that I probably haven't said yet, but you're looking at those guys in the AFC. And there's competition for it. So maybe Dobbins and Edwards don't make the Pro Bowl. And, how much is a Pro Bowl nod, right? Maybe we're talking about an all-pro team for one of these guys. I don't know what we're talking about. But I think that with the way that the Ravens offense looks to be, at least, moving back into the bully ball, run-first offense, not completely run-heavy where it's only running. I think they're going to try to balance it out a bit more. And this is what I was expecting last season. But I think that, yeah, Dobbins and Edwards certainly have the potential to make their first Pro Bowl. I think at the wide receiver position, Rashad Bateman definitely has a chance. The pure number one receiver on this roster. I know that the volume for Bateman might not be the same as a player in Kansas City or a player in wherever, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, whatever, but he still has potential. If he's able to put up a 1,000-yard season, have 6, 7, 8 touchdowns. I don't know. Now look, there are, again, plenty of talented wide receivers in the AFC that you can talk about and say, well, why would Rashad Bateman make it over this guy? And my answer is, look, we don't know how these guys are going to play in 2022, right? Guys could have down seasons. Guys could, and hopefully not here, guys could get injured potentially. And you never want to see that, but it's true. So you have options if you're Rashad Bateman to maybe sneak your way onto the Pro Bowl roster, a player that I think some people are. Again, it's like the underrated aspect. And I think the way the Baltimore offense looks to be heading, again, it's not going to be the same volume as it is in Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or Kansas City or any of those pass-heavy offenses, whatever team you want to say. But I do think that, again, if Rashad Bateman performs, because he is, again, clearly the unquestioned number one wide receiver, and he's going to get a lot of targets. And I think those targets that Marquise Brown is leaving behind, the ones from Sammy Watkins and Miles Boykin, no matter how many or little that is, there are still targets to go around. Some of those will go to Mark Andrews. Others will go to the running backs. Others will go to his wide receiver counterparts, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tylan Wallace, etc. But I think that Bateman definitely has at least a shot to make his first Pro Bowl in 2022. How likely? I don't know. I don't know how likely it is, but I think there is a shot for him to do so, even if the Ravens offense isn't quite, I don't want to say not wide receiver friendly, because I think it is to an extent, but it's not the same type of pass volume offense that we see from other teams. I'll say that. So then talking about the offensive line, I was pretty surprised to find out that Kevin Zeitler has not made a Pro Bowl throughout his career. A steady player, someone who I certainly think has, well, first of all, should have made the Pro Bowl last year, had one of the best seasons from any guard in the league, and was, again, that steady veteran guy on that line when there was so much shuffling to go around all throughout there. It was really Bradley Bozeman and Kevin Zeitler who stayed pretty consistent at their positions. Then there was shuffling along the other three positions. So Kevin Zeitler is a guy that I definitely think has the potential to make his first Pro Bowl, which, again, is crazy to me. The fact that he has never made a Pro Bowl is pretty incredible, considering he came into the league in 2012 as a first rounder by the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals made him that pick. So I think Zeitler is definitely one that I could see making his first Pro Bowl, because I expect him to have another very high quality season at that right guard spot. He's been in this offense for a year. It will probably look a little bit different, but Zeitler is a strong player. He is good in both run and pass protection. And yeah, I think that he definitely has that potential. And when we're talking about Pro Bowls here, it's not just the pure, oh, well, this guy's going to make the Pro Bowl versus this guy's not going to make the Pro Bowl. The fact that they're even in this conversation, or that I'm putting them in this conversation, one, I think says that I expect them to have a good season. But two, if they do perform at that Pro Bowl, like on the fence level, that means they did have another very good season. So Dobbins, Edwards, Bateman, Zeitler, all guys who I could see in that range and could definitely make their first Pro Bowl here in 2022. And then I'll put a dark horse here. I'm going to say Tyler Linderbaum. Yeah, I'm going to say a rookie in Tyler Linderbaum. I don't know. The center position, again, there are quality centers throughout the AFC. But if Linderbaum, kind of lives up to the hype and all the stuff that about him coming out of college, one of the best center prospects in years, this, that, and the other, hey, I think he could definitely make the Pro Bowl as a first-year guy. And I think that we'll talk about in the third segment of the defense, his fellow first-round pick, Kyle Hamilton, has that same potential. Two players who I think were some of the best at their positions, and their first-round pick status obviously cements that. But who knows? I think in this offense, Linderbaum's going to be asked to do a lot of different things, and that'll be put on display. And I think offensive numbers will reflect how Linderbaum played in the offensive line as well, because I still believe it starts up front. So Linderbaum is a player that I'm putting as a dark horse candidate, for me at least, to maybe make his first Pro Bowl in his first NFL season. So those are just some of the names that I have. So I talked about Dobbins, Edwards, I talked about Bateman, I talked about Zeitler, I talked about Linderbaum. I think, this Ravens offense for first-year Pro Bowl guys, I mean, we could talk about Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. Those guys have been, Patrick Ricard, whatever. Those guys have made Pro Bowls. So not worthy of this discussion, but I think, again, I'd be shocked if we didn't see any of those guys in the Pro Bowl. But for the Ravens, they have a couple of other guys on this offense who have not earned the Pro Bowl honor that they could definitely do. And again, whether that is Pro Bowl, whether that is all pro first team, all pro second team, the fact that they're in this conversation, again, I expect them to have good years. They're all very talented players. And if they do have good seasons, that's a good thing for the Ravens, obviously. But we're going to talk about a bunch more in the final segment. Coming up, we're going to be diving into defensive players and specialists on this team who could be in line to make their first Pro Bowl in 2022. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Rock Auto. And this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer? Choosing the only brand the warehouse happens to carry. You have to do is access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. And you can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Their prices are very, very low. They're a family business, and you can explore the easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On. There, how'd you hear about us back? So we sent you amazing selection, reliability, low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Ravens your first listen here of the day. Be sure to subscribe to this channel on YouTube, like the video, follow us in audio form, turn notifications on, and make your second listen Locked On NFL. I hosted the Monday show. I talked about Deshaun Watson, Terry McLaurin, and I talked about the Saints defense with experts from around our network getting the local perspective on those situations. So be sure to check that out as well. And now we're going to talk about the defensive players on this Ravens roster who could potentially make their first Pro Bowl appearance in 2022. Now, on the defensive line, I'm going to put a couple of dark horse candidates out there. Justin Madubuike and Travis Jones. Yeah, we're going bold. Again, some of these Ravens rookies are just so uber talented. I can't leave them off this. Even the potential that some of these guys make the Pro Bowl. Now, it seems more likely, obviously, that if a Ravens defensive lineman were to make the Pro Bowl, it'd be Calais Campbell, right? That just seems like the obvious answer. But Justin Madubuike is a player that now going into his third season, a guy that I think is going to have to perform very well, and I think that he will. And he's shown, again, the box score stats from Madubuike haven't been, they absolutely come up off the page and they're amazing stats, but he's done stuff off of the box score, very good as a run defender. He's shown some pressure from the interior, and he's been working very hard. And again, talking about his leadership role that he talked to the media about during the media availability during mandatory minicamp. There's a lot to like about what he could do. And with the Ravens potentially wanting to manage Calais Campbell's snaps a bit more, Campbell had to play the most by far snaps along that defensive line in 2021, just based off of injuries and a couple other circumstances. So if they want to maybe scale his snaps back a little bit, I think that opens up opportunities for Madubuike and also for Travis Jones, who is a pass rushing guru from that defensive line spot. Now, again, I think his game will translate to the NFL. Maybe there are a couple rookie struggles here. Maybe there's a rookie wall or something. But I have very high hopes for Travis Jones. I don't know if it's very, very realistic he makes the Pro Bowl. I think this is more of the very dark horse candidates. But if he comes on as a rookie and has 6, 7, 8 sacks, maybe, then the league gives him consideration for that. I think that'd be something that, maybe like all pro teams or whatnot. But again, for a rookie, that's very, very hard to do. So I'm not saying that's more realistic than a Madubuike type player, but those two could definitely make their first Pro Bowl. But I think Madubuike is definitely a lot more likely at this point than Travis Jones. Moving on to outside linebacker, I definitely agree with Bleacher Report and Ian Wharton. I think Odafe Owe is a prime candidate. Owe, much like we talked about Rashad Bateman, is the pure and question number one wide receiver. Bateman's fellow first-round pick in 2021 in Owe, he's the pure and question number one outside linebacker right now in Baltimore's outside linebacker room. Now, that does have to do with injuries, and if injuries were not a thing, I'd be talking about Tyus Bowser right now, but it just doesn't seem like he'll be back for the start of week one, maybe not till the middle of the year. Who knows? Again, we just don't know. But always a player who's going to be relied upon in a big, big, big way. Absolutely. He burst onto the scene during his rookie season, like really came out of the gate on fire, kind of tapered off a little bit towards the end of the season. But now with an offseason to work, a full year in the NFL under his belt, kind of understanding the nuances of the game a bit more, I think he's ready. And he could be a player that we see reach maybe 8, 9, 10 double-digit sack areas. And that would be huge because it's not just what he does from a pass rushing perspective that makes this team good on defense, or that he helps contribute to make this defense good. He's the guy who can obviously play a big disruptor role against the run. If you want to play him in other spots, you can. He's very versatile. He's a big guy too, so his athleticism does really well for him. So I think that Owe is definitely a player that I could look at, and I could definitely see first-year Pro Bowl potential on a guy like that. Speaking of first-year Pro Bowl potential, Patrick Queen is somebody who I know some people aren't as high on Patrick Queen as many others are. It's kind of a mixed bag when you talk to people about, well, how high are you on Patrick Queen? What do you like about Patrick Queen? I like Patrick Queen personally, and I think that he's a guy that can definitely earn that first Pro Bowl nod this year with a big season. He's a player that I think overall you're looking at it. He's a guy that has had a very up and down couple of years to his career. And especially if you want to talk about up and down his 2021 season, where really rough start to the year, finished off very strong, in my opinion. Now with Josh Bynes there full time, again, another year under his belt, the flashes that we've seen out of him, it all comes down to experience here for me. I think Queen, with those couple of years now, he's a player that I look at and I say that he definitely has the potential to make his first Pro Bowl. And again, very talented linebackers throughout the AFC. So you're kind of wondering, well, who would he replace and whatnot? But I think he certainly has a potential. If he has like an 100 tackle season, obviously shows that his missed tackling does improve, some decision-making stuff, and obviously just being in the right place at the right time. He's a very flashy player, someone who has that sideline-to-sideline speed. Hopefully his coverage ability improves a bit more as well. But yeah, I mean, there is a possibility that Patrick Queen could make his first Pro Bowl appearance in 2022 with a very good season, and I think that'd be great for the Baltimore defense. Moving over to the secondary, cornerbacks, Marlon Humphrey's made Pro Bowls. Marcus Peters has made Pro Bowls. I don't see anything there. Looking at the secondary, Marcus Williams has not made a Pro Bowl. I think that he is definitely a player who can make his first. He's a very talented player, one of the best free safeties in the NFL. Ball hawking ability, also deceptively physical. I don't think people don't like understand how physical he is. I feel like some people do. Like, people who have studied Marcus Williams, they understand that he has that deceptive physicality to his game. I think he's a player that could definitely make his first Pro Bowl appearance as a safety. And another guy, I did hint at this in the second segment, not Tyler Linderbaum, but again, his fellow first-round picking Kyle Hamilton. Hamilton was the 14th overall selection, a player that I still am just in awe of how he was there. And, I mean, I think for a player like Hamilton, who's able to move all around the field, do so much there, he's a guy that with a very good season, and maybe the Ravens have two safeties making the Pro Bowl. Maybe Chuck Clark makes a Pro Bowl. Who knows? Like, maybe if Chuck Clark stays, he can make a Pro Bowl appearance. All these safeties have that potential. I think that for Hamilton himself, though, if he doesn't hit a rookie wall, if he comes out of the gate absolutely on fire, continues that throughout the whole season, and, he's making big plays, intercepting passes, being a force against the run, and just being all over the field, that's a player that could definitely have a great season that translates into a Pro Bowl appearance, maybe an All-Pro appearance, etc. Obviously, Pro Bowl appearances to some people are very like, who cares, right? Like, who cares about Pro Bowl appearances? So, like, maybe All-Pros are better in terms of that, and like deciding who has great seasons and whatnot. But again, same thing. These guys are in this conversation. They're having good seasons for the Ravens, which is key for them. Specialists, Justin Tucker's made so many Pro Bowls. He's a guy that will definitely, I think at least, should make the Pro Bowl again in 2022. But we could see potentially Jordan Stout make the Pro Bowl. We could see a guy like Nick Moore make the Pro Bowl as a long snapper. Who knows? I mean, those are guys who are still a little bit unproven. Moore going into his second full season as the full-time long snapper for the Ravens. Stout going into his first full year after the Sam Cook retirement. But, I mean, I think for Baltimore, those two have definitely potential to make their first Pro Bowl. So all up and down this roster for the Ravens, very talented players. And those are just the guys who are first-year Pro Bowl eligible or first-year All-Pro, whichever one of those you want to talk about. I focus more on Pro Bowl, but again, the Ravens have other players who have made many Pro Bowls or multiple Pro Bowls. Lamar Jackson, as we talked about, Mark Andrews, Justin Tucker, Marlon Humphrey, Calais Campbell, etc. Those are guys who have made multiple Pro Bowls. So the talent, the young talent, the talent that maybe has been a bit like disrespected by Pro Bowl non-votes, like a player like Kevin Zeitler, they have talent all up and down this roster. And again, I'm excited about their depth heading into 2022. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for joining in and tuning in. When we get back in tomorrow, we'll be diving in, answering your mailbag questions and talking more Ravens football. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you back here tomorrow.